Cool. There's an interesting sign up here. All I saw was, Mike, close your mouth. That's not going to work so well, but so thanks, John. My name is Andrew Ross. I work for an organization called the Eclipse Foundation. We help open source projects and open data projects. I'm actually not here to talk a lot about that today, although we do have some talks coming up this afternoon that are location tech projects, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. My talk's actually a little different than a lot of the talks this morning, so I'm not talking about any specific technology. It's actually in a way more of a non-technical talk. It's also in a way probably a funny point in the schedule because I'm actually talking a little bit about sort of setting the stage for big data. And so Marcus's talk and Peter's talk was very much related to what I'm going to talk about. So before I do, whoops, let me just do this so I can actually use my magic slide sorter. So before I do talk about that, I just want to do a quick shout out to an event taking place in March in California. I'm the conference chair, and actually we have a number of our team here today, so if you guys just want to wave your hands, there's Rob there, and there's a few other people here. I think, is Andy here today as well? Guess not. So it takes place in sunny California, so certainly the weather today is helping us market this event. It's a great event focusing a lot on open source geospatial technologies, open data technologies. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't been to a FOSDEM before, come to this one or come to another one. There's actually ones in Europe and FOSDEM Korea coming up in the fall. Really great events with lots of really great speakers and content. So how many people have heard the term software is eating the world before? Really? I'm surprised by that. Mark Andreessen, he's a guy involved with founding Netscape back in the day, wrote a famous blog. I think it actually became a Wall Street Journal article talking about how software is eating the world. What's interesting about it, and this is, you'll see how this fits into my talk in a minute, is that almost everything out there today has software integrated into it. So consumer devices, automotive vehicles and whatnot. And so in a lot of ways, even companies who aren't software companies start to look and smell a lot like a software company. They have software developers on staff. They have issues affecting their products and services that are software issues. And so in a way, software is very rapidly becoming an integral part of business, even if you're a grocery store or a waste disposal company or companies that wouldn't normally have anything to do with software per se. So this is not terribly surprising. I do a different version of this talk where I say it's their fault and their fault and their fault. That basically software and data is becoming a big problem. Simply put, we're generating more data. So a couple of the talks earlier, Marcus and Peter talked about that, how data is becoming almost overwhelming. I think it's actually long past overwhelming. There was just an article the other day in Canada where I'm from, where our national security agencies is saying, yeah, we've got the data, but there's just too darn much of it, and we can't make sense of it. It's just coming in too fast, and we can't process it. And so even though we had it, and if we actually go back and look in retrospect, we can see the things that tell us that problems happen. So when somebody came up onto Parliament Hill with a gun, they actually had the data, the evidence to indicate that that was likely to happen, but they couldn't get to it in time. So not surprising, we are overwhelmed with data. The other thing, and I just quick point here about computer vision and some of the machine learning and automation stuff that's happening is that this is continuing to accelerate. I think it's going to get self-driving cars who are able to go into an unexplored area and actually map it automatically and generate and send data back. I think it's going to get more and more out of hand. So the point of that is we're simply drowning in data. Now, when you hear people talk and write about big data, you hear them talk about the 3 V's or sometimes 5 V's or 6 V's or things. The key ones are basically velocity, variety, and volume. It's more than that, because if you think about it, and I think each of you in this room live this every day, you're taking data from a number of different sources. So you might be taking OpenStreetMap data, you might be taking GeoNames data, points of interest data from other sources. You might be taking National Weather Agency in your country, data from there. So you're taking data from a number of different sources. There's one person I was talking to from the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. They take data from 90 different sources. And so for them, it's very overwhelming to take those data sets, conflate them, and actually get to something that they can use. And then by the time they get it, the data is already out of date, and they have to start over and do it again. It's a very painful process. Now, the other thing I want to say is this is really important. I don't know if you've been in a major city where there's a transit system breaks down, or trying to fly from one place in the world to another part in the world where the flight system, the aviation system just breaks down and things aren't working properly. You know, transportation, communications, agriculture, entertainment, everything is software and data related. So if basically these things don't work, we have a very bad day and society starts to crumble. It actually kind of scares me. In a previous lifetime, I worked in telecom, where we try to make everything 5 and 6 nines bulletproof, reliable, and try to anticipate any possible failure, and actually have geo-redundancy with one set of switches on one side of the world, another set of switches on another side of the world. Not everything's built that way. And so it's actually quite scary that software and data makes society so brittle. So in addition to all this, we're actually interacting with data. So I'm sure many of you are emailing back and forth and actually looking at the schedule and doing bi-directional data flows in terms of figuring out what your day looks like, figuring out what it is you're going to do next, maybe communicating with friends around the world. So it's not just simply taking something and downloading it. It's actually you're taking something, downloading it, modifying it, sharing partial data back or complete data back, or distributing it to somebody else. And so it's those workflows that make things a lot more complicated. And so again, the types of things, social media, smartphones, really make this so much easier than it used to be, and the interfaces are actually becoming a lot easier to do this. So in my mind, what's happening is this. We're going from a system where we have more need for real-time interactions with the data. We want to know what's happening right now. We don't want to know what's happening, last week, last month, last year. Some people are doing research to look at that, and that's good and important. But increasingly, we want to know what's really happening right now, and also the interactions with that data are becoming increasingly complex. So for those of you, I imagine most of you are developers. Just quick show of hands, who develop software in here? Okay, almost everybody. Cool. So you guys know all about Git. You know all about distributed version control. You know what I'm talking about. That basically there is no one central version of the truth. There's no one central place where everybody downloads the data, and that's exactly the version for everybody. It's actually much more complicated and nuanced, and people are constantly interacting and changing and making adjustments all the time. So with what I talked about earlier, much of our world depends on software and data. I kind of laugh because people get really bent out of shape and saying, oh, Google's taking over the world, or Esri's taking over the world, or used to be Microsoft is taking over the world. So for those of you, I've been doing open source and a little bit of open data, but mostly open source software since the 90s, actually the early 90s. And back then we were deathly afraid of Microsoft. Microsoft has so much power. I don't think anybody is all that terribly afraid of Microsoft anymore. I think things have changed quite dramatically. So I'm not actually all that bothered by any one particular vendor because things change over time. That if you look at Apple, Apple's printing money hand over fist. They're hugely successful today, but if they don't learn how to do something else, well, then in time what they did so well that made them a lot of money becomes kind of irrelevant, and something else replaces it. So I'm not all excited about single vendors. Now what this really means is that no single vendor can actually solve these problems. It's not going to be a Google thing. It's not going to be an Apple thing, a Facebook thing, or you pick your vendor. No one government can solve these things. So the only way to do this, and this is very topical given that we're here at an open source conference, is that we need to collaborate. So how do we do that? This is basically what I do for a living, is encourage people that they can do this successfully, and they're not actually giving up things that are important to them, like making money, having gainful employment, basically being able to collaborate with other people and share their research, share their data, and basically make society better. So generally this is one simple way of looking at it, but people collaborate on the commodity components. So they do things, if it doesn't make sense, and in the past, especially in terms of the types of functions and libraries that you guys use, I used to run around from company to company and say, is there something unique about how you calculate the area of a polygon? Is there something unique about how you calculate the length of a line string? You calculate how they overlap or intersect, or all kinds of simple features from what you see. Do you do that somehow different and special compared to your competitor? And the funny part is they all go, absolutely not. And I said, well, why on earth are you writing the same software as your competitor to everybody else? And in fact, when there's good open source libraries out there that you should be using, and you should be contributing back to. And so in a lot of cases, that was convincing to them. I said, you're right. We should actually collaborate. We should look for these kinds of opportunities. And so this is important. Now, on the other side of things, here in this audience, I can tell you, I've been doing software for at least 25 years, and I've worked with people who have been doing it even longer than I have. There is never going to be one true open data center with all open software. It's just not going to happen. So we have to be realistic. You're going to have a pragmatic mix of open and proprietary technologies. That's just the way the world works. And so we have to be mindful of that. And actually having these kinds of models which allow open participation and collaboration, they're really important. So now what's neat about them, and this, for those of you who haven't been heavily immersed in open source communities and collaboration, is this phenomenon. So I have a more complicated version of this talk where I start to talk about different companies forming partnerships and working together. And so point to point, all right, you got one set of non-disclosure agreements, one set of what the rules of the road are for working with each other. You add in a third organization, all of a sudden it's complicated because you have a separate set of documents between each of those three organizations. You add 4, it just becomes overwhelming. So if we get to 5, 6, 10, it's a nightmare. And so they just simply cannot collaborate effectively. And so this is why doing this in an open source project community foundation makes so much sense, is that you really minimize some of that low value or even no value overhead, and allows you to be a lot more effective. So getting back to the themes that we talked about with big data, really what we want is to be able to have big data, and I'm picking on a few specific projects, and I actually don't mean to be offensive and exclude other ones, because there's a lot of really amazing projects on all aspects of this kind of technology stack. So Peter's FOSDEM project is a fantastic big data project that fits over here with GeoMesa, GeoTrellis, GeoGenie. This is just to keep it concise. So take this with a grain of salt. I'm not trying to exclude others. It's just there's so many good technologies that I can't include them all. So what we really want is we don't want big data on everything, right? When you're running around with your smartphone, you're not going to have a terabyte of data on your smartphone. That's ridiculous. You're not going to have a terabyte of data in your car. What you really need is just the data for the area of the city that you happen to be in, or just the points of interest for the area you're interested in traveling to, just when you need it. And you want to make sure that it's current. You want to make sure you can update it and pull down any changes. So really what we need is we need little data that is a subclass of big data, and we need to be able to push and pull back and forth effectively and efficiently. So this was really neat about these projects that I'm talking about here, is that some of these guys, particularly you're going to hear Rob later on talking about the GeoTrellis project. On the mobile side, you're going to hear Manuel talking about mobile map technology. What's cool about those is they are architected from the ground up to solve particular problems, to be very, very high performant in the case of GeoTrellis, or in mobile map technology to be very consistent across multiple mobile platforms, and very fast, and have certain features and capabilities that make them very well suited to this type of thing. Now, bridging between them is very important as well. So you're not going to, as I said, pull down that big data and put it on your smartphone. What you want to do is basically have something that gets just the data you want and allows you to manage it in a sensible way. So almost all the hands went up when you guys asked if you were developers, and what that means is that you guys know all about Git, or Mercurial, or other distributed version control technologies. So when I talk about GeoGig, which is basically a Git-like implementation for spatial data, you'll probably nod your head and go, okay, that sounds kind of cool. So basically take data from OpenStreetMap, or PostGIS, or Oracle Spatial, or SQL Server, pull it down to have a local copy of it, make changes. Obviously, as you're making changes, just like you would with Git for source code, you can actually see who changed what, why they changed it, compare two versions, push and pull changes back and forth between different people. So it's a really game-changing protocol in service and library, and way to deal with data. And so I think it's quite cool is what these type of technologies are going to open up, is suddenly we could do these kinds of things. I don't even necessarily think the big guys are doing an exceptionally good job about this. So, I mean, yes, what Google is doing is very cool, and they are definitely a leader in many ways. But I think in a lot of ways, as technology changes and innovation happens, it's going to hit them as well. And so I think this open collaboration around some of these technologies, especially when you build up a big community and they become sort of a de facto standard implementing open standards, I think it's a very interesting thing in terms of what it means for the world and for society. So now, I didn't talk a little bit about my slides. I actually was going to do this talk without slides at all, so that might have been a little bit weird. But actually, I think it's a lot more fun and more interesting. But one thing I do want to talk about is it's actually not technology for technology's sake, and that's the thing us as technologists we lose sight of. I can't tell you. So I mean, I've been doing software for 25 years, and I can't tell you how many times people's eyes glaze over as I start talking about how fast something is, or how much better this protocol is or how much more robust this protocol is. It's not about that at all. And you guys know this because these are the types of things you're doing. It's actually about making society better. So let's plan the city better. Let's be better stewards for the environment. I talked about security, so let's basically use that data and figure out what's going to happen and see if we can prevent it. I mean, obviously we can't always, and we've got to make sure our society remains an open society and welcoming to all. But these are the types of things that we want to do. So it's actually more about the people and the society side than it is necessarily about the technology for itself. So now that said, I like cool technology just like you guys. So just to almost wrap up, I think 2 more slides. So some other cool projects that I didn't talk about here. If you guys haven't seen it, please do check out Graph-Hopper. It's an amazing routing library. Super fast and really cool. And the work that Peter's doing on that is just amazing. You're going to see Manuel talk today about mobile map technology, which is an awesome and amazing library. There's another one out there by a gentleman named Steve Gifford called Whirly Globe and Maply. Also really cool and really neat, and definitely something you need to see. And in fact, if you're interested in that kind of stuff and when you like Manuel's talk, come see us after, because we can demo for you right in front of you with our smartphones and stuff and show you the kinds of things you can do. So Patrick Cozy and the Cesium team, this is a talk here today talking about the integration between Cesium and OpenLayers 3, which is actually another talk I encourage you to check out. There's a really cool project that was born out of FOSDEM in Portland last year called GeoLoad. So it's another initiative I encourage you to check out. So it's not just about, as I'm talking, version controlling data, it's actually finding the data in the first place. And so what GeoLoad, and there's other initiatives out there aim to do, is become sort of an index of where you can get great data sources, free data sources that you can use stuff for. So Location Tech is a community that I'm heavily involved with, and some of the projects listed below are instances of projects that are hosted there. So we do all kinds of services, so legal services and IT infrastructure services, and build release engineering services. So basically, whatever we can do to help the projects to be successful. And so I can encourage you to check it out. So just to wrap up, enjoy your day here. This is a really cool event with lots of smart people. I encourage you to use open source software, open data, and follow open standards whenever it makes sense. It's not always going to make sense. So as sort of a gray-haired guy who's been doing this stuff for a long time, don't bog down too much in trying to remain purists. You have to be pragmatic sometimes, and that's okay. So I talk about being pragmatic and mixing technologies. And I encourage you to get involved in some of the technologies that are covered today. So I think for many of you, Grass is well known. It's a really cool project, actually. It's amazing to see some of the performance enhancements that they're doing and some of the new user interfaces features. That's very exciting for me. Some of these new projects are projects that you probably haven't heard of before. So I encourage you to go up and talk to the speaker and get to know what they're doing. So, and that's it. I think I probably have a couple minutes just for some quick questions if anybody has them. I should say one more thing. So if anybody wants some stickers, I got some stickers here. So so it's amazing at this conference. The stickers just go crazy. Like everybody's grabbing the stickers and snatching them up. So please help yourself. So okay. If there's no questions, well, thank you very much for listening to me, and enjoy your day.